Morning, everyone.
Morning. Today we're gonna have Whitney is going to talk about DIY water features, some things that you can do to add some movement and water and coolness. Water, one of the great things about water in the garden, even a small little fountain that trickles, that sound is a psychological way to make you feel cooler even in the heat of summer. And so there's some little things, because water gardens can be very expensive, large fountains, things like that. But there's some ways that you can add this interest into your garden from things as small as a small bucket. She's going to talk about all these different options and some things that she's done or seen done in the past. And so I'm just going to turn it over to her. And thank y'all very much. Next week we are doing a class on plumeria, waking up your plumeria with Renee Brown. So make sure you come back for that next week or tune in via Zoom. Thank you very much.
All right. So how's everybody doing? Good. Okay. So my name is Whitney, and I work here at the gardens, and then I do my own thing too. And I've built a few water features on my own and some very large water features as well. So I'm going to go over a couple things that I've done, and then kind of the basics. Does anybody here have fountains or ever worked with fountains? Okay. So you have the in-ground, above ground, self-contained.
I got 2 ponds, one flows into the other.
Okay.
300 plus, the other one's 400 plus.
Okay. So you're familiar with all of the big systems and so forth. So you'll understand my big tube here after a while. This actually was a piece of a tubing that came from a feature that I did, and it had a 4,500 gallon per hour pump on it. It had 2 ball valves and a 3-way splitter. Thing was quite large. So, and you'll see that here shortly, but this is a tubing that it took. That comes into play with all of this too.
Where did you get it?
This, Home Depot. The only place around here that really has this kind of stuff. And you can get, there's a lot of places actually online. One of my favorite places though is Nelson Water Gardens in Houston. Actually, Katie, love them. And they are phenomenal. They've got basins, and they've got all your fountain needs and supplies and pond supplies and bog plants and you name it, they have it there. And if you don't know, ask. They're more than happy to share their knowledge and their information with you. Can't say enough about them. So, and there's some other places, Atlantic Water Gardens. There's a few places online that I really do like. So kind of check it out. They're usually the ones that'll first ones to hit when you do a search. So so we're just going to get started on. Here we go. Okay, so as Michael was saying, water features are a great way of adding that whole serenity thing to your yard. And not only that, but water features also help bring in your birds and some of your wildlife and so forth as well. Like with birds, give them a place to rest and nest and give them a food source and water source, and they'll come. So, and then there's 3 different types, really. The self-contained, which is really, really kind of easy, self-explanatory. There's the above ground, and then the infinity fountains. I think most people are really familiar with the infinity fountains because they're the ones that kind of, spill over and then disappear. So it's sometimes called disappearing fountains. I didn't touch too much on the pond thing in here because I don't necessarily do a whole lot of ponds, and not a lot of people have a lot of room for ponds. So I don't have that come up too often. And if that was the case, I'd probably refer them out to somebody who does that. That's me personally. So self-contained, like I said, these are going to be really simple. They contain everything, all your basin, your jar, your pump, everything all enclosed into one. Very low maintenance. They do great with smaller rooms, sunrooms, et cetera, et cetera. And you're going to see one here. Ta-da! So this is all the components that is in a self-contained. That's it right there. Really, really simple. Pump, a piece of tubing that goes from the top to the bottom of the pot, pump, plug it in, fill it up, you're good to go. Okay, so next on my list was above ground fountains. Now these are basically like a self-contained fountain, except it's much larger. It's going to be basically like your regular full-size infinity fountain, but it's above ground. You've got your round basin with the grate, your pump, everything's still there, but it has this concrete ring around the base of it, which is incredibly heavy. So if anybody's ever did it up, because these probably weigh 250, but of course, so, and they're super easy. Just as they don't say maintenance and so forth is all your same thing with the water fountains and so forth.
So are this the
Yes. They do have solar powered pumps now, but I have found that usually the head height that on them is not very strong. They don't get much, sometimes 20 inches, and that's from the bottom of the basin to the top of the fountain. So, 20 inches is not really a whole lot. So it's better for like tabletop or little tiny type of things, little fountains. And we'll get into more on that too. The thing with, and then you got your infinity fountains. So yes, ma'am. They're all going to have a power source to them. It's going to be somewhere, near or far, depending on what kind of pump you have. Sometimes the boards are only 6 foot. Sometimes they're as long as 20 feet. So it just kind of depends. And this is just a basic breakdown of what your fountain is. These are great. This is a great demonstration because basically any pot or any kind of receptacle can be turned into a fountain. As long as you have a hole in the bottom and you can plumb it, you can turn it into a fountain. Super easy. I've done them with, and you'll see in here, I've got an oil burner that, had the top where you put the reservoir for your oil. And then I just put a hole through the bottom and set it up into a fountain. You do any kind of pot. I mean, basically, if it's got a hole, you can make it into a fountain. Simple. It's just all about the plumbing and whatnot. And then the plumbing is always fun. Depending on, so this is just what I said. Oh, the main thing I'm going to tell you too is that when you put your plumbing all together into your pot or whatever it is that you're using, whether you use either, the nylon barb fittings or you use a bulkhead, which is actually basically 2 very large type of washers with threading in them and rubber gaskets that come together, and you kind of screw them together and they seal and come together over your pot, one on top, one on the bottom, which are great. I love them, but they still need to be sealed because when you put that riser, that PVC riser into the middle of the pipe, into the middle of your pot, that's going to keep all of your water in your pot. Should you ever lose electricity, it keeps your water from going out. So it keeps it there, and you don't want to lose all that water if you ever, have a power outage or whatever. You need to unplug it, so forth, so on. So it kind of keeps all your water. So that's really, really important. And I use a silicone. I like to use a clear silicone adhesive sealant. That works the best. Make sure your surface is really clean and let it cure the full 24. I usually go 48 hours on that because the more you can have it sealed, the better off you're going to be in the long run because that stuff doesn't set up once it's underwater or submerged in contact with water for a long time. Definitely do that. That's a main thing I have learned because I've tried to rush through that and just had bad luck because now you're wet silicone sealant everywhere and that stuff is awful to try and get off. Okay, so here we have your bulkheads on the left, which is really kind of nice. They've got them all the way from like 3 inch down to 1.5 inches. So there's really no reason why you can't use one of these. I prefer the bulkheads over the nylon barb fittings just because they have a little bit more rigidity, and they're not going to kind of flex and bend as much. Now, with that being said, they do have a fairly large space that they take up on your pot, and especially on the bottom. It's not going to sit flat. So whenever you've got your grate, whatever you're doing, whatever your grate is, you're going to have to make sure that you've got a hole that's going to set down into where your pipe is going and your tubing is going to feed up through the bottom. Because otherwise it's not going to be stable. It'll wobble, it'll tip. It's just not a good situation. So make sure that is level and allow for that spacing on that. And usually it's pretty deep too. So kind of keep that in mind when you do those. The nylon barb, granted, they are super easy and simple. Notice that middle, that adapter part, it's got a very, very small flange on it. So when you do put that piece into your pot and you seal it up, know that there's not going to be a whole lot there to kind of stabilize that. Whereas the bulkheads have got a little bit more stability to them. Easy, yeah, the nylon barb fittings are really easy and they're quick. And I guess for smaller type of things, great. But if you're doing a bigger pot that's 3-4 foot tall, definitely going to want to go with something a little bit sturdier. Okay, so there's the PVC riser that I was telling you about. Now the PVC riser, like I said, it's going to be in a slip fitting. When you meet it down into your bulkhead, it's going to just screw on, and then that fitting is going to be a slip. Your PVC goes down inside of that. You can pull it out if the winds pick up. Notice a lot of times fountains tend to dry out or the wind's blowing and you see this water kind of splashing out, going everywhere else. And then it ends up running dry and you're having to fill it. Well, if you take that PVC pipe out, instead of having a plume of water, now it's just going to kind of cascade over the pot. But it's not blowing out. You're not losing your water. So, and then once the winds kind of die down, stick it back in, you're good to go. And it's just a slip fitting. Real easy. And then you've got your splitters. Now, if you're going to do different types of features on a water fountain or whatnot, and you've got different things that you want to kind of run all at once, that's doable. And this is how you're going to do it. And it's really not as complicated as it looks. Basically, it feeds in one, splits it off, goes into your different tubes. Now with that, know that you're going to have a bigger pump because you're going to have a little bit more water friction. And depending on how far away your pump is to your, your features, you're going to have to deal with that too. So the rule of thumb normally for pumps on fountains is you want your head height to go 1.5 times the depth of your pot in your fountain. So if your fountain is 30 inches tall from the bottom of the basin to the top, you're going to go 45 inches water rise. And a great thing about a lot of pumps now is that they're going to have right here, ideal pumping range, 2 to 3 feet. So it takes all the guesswork out of it. Now there is a formula that you can use to figure out your gallons per hour, and it'll tell you how much, it's easier just to have them tell you, to be honest with you, because it can be quite tricky. And if you're off on your math or you're not good at it, it's just easier just to see it and read it off the box, if you ask me. And so far, I haven't had a problem with their, information being incorrect. So that's a good thing. Now, if you're running multiple features, basically times by 2. So if you're, this one says 2 to 3 feet, but you've got all these features, go ahead and double that one. So I'd go with a 6 foot, 7, 8 foot, just so you can have that extra pressure because you're going to need it. Then if it's too much, that's what those little valves are for. You can always turn down the pressure on the certain things. And if need be, if you needed to do an inline ball valve, which is basically stick a pipe here, you've got your valve, it's got a handle on it, turns off your water, increases or decreases your flow. Really simple, easy to turn, and doesn't take a whole lot of anything. Don't really need to glue them. They're slip. They just kind of slip right in there, nice and tight. You're good to go. Okay, and here we go. This is where I was saying anything can be turned into a fountain. This is an oil burner, and the basin on this is actually a whiskey barrel liner. It doesn't have any holes in it. So yeah, I just took a saucer, terracotta saucer, put a hole through the middle of it. Now the holes on some of these pots might be a little tricky for some of y'all, but if you've got a masonry bit, or somebody who has a masonry bit or is good with that kind of stuff, ask them. They can just drill you a hole at the bottom of it. And, get them all sorts of different sizes. I have a friend who's got a angle grinder, and he put one of his round bits on it that cuts holes, and he was able to cut things in, the holes into that saucer for me, which I fed all my tubing up into the bottom of my pot, and cinder block inside there on its end, set it down on top of that, set my pot down, filled it with water, good to go. And that was it. And it was just stuff that super easy. Doesn't have to be elaborate. And I have had customers say, well, what about the cracks in the pot? What about the scratches? When it's wet, no one sees it. And from the street or from, far away, no one's going to see it. So it doesn't have to be a perfect, ideal, all nice and neat and pristine. It's not going to stay that way. I can tell you that. Because once after the water evaporates and it's out there for a while, you're going to get kind of glazing fractures in the little, on the clear coating and on the ceramic, but it doesn't really matter. It's going to be fine. And somebody asked me about freezing. What happens if it gets really, really cold? I have not experienced a fountain freezing up here. As long as it's running, it's going to do fine. Running water doesn't tend to freeze so easily. Now, if it does, I don't want to be living here. It's going to be really, really, really cold. So I haven't ever had a problem with that. And if it does, it freezes around the edges if it comes in, but never had a problem with it freezing. So that's one thing. Another question I've got asked many times is mosquitoes. What about mosquitoes? Mosquitoes don't like running water. So as long as it's moving and it's not stagnant, you're not going to have a problem with that. I think the most thing I have a problem with is the cats. Cats love to get up there and drink off the top of the fountain. I'm not quite sure why, but that's what they do. And so I have them jumping up there every once in a while. Not that big a deal. As long as they don't tip it over, we're okay. Okay, so this was my freeform fountain. This is the big sucker that I did. And this one it ended up being 12 by 15 is the size on it. And so that whole basin, that whole thing was the bottom, basically was my basin. And ended up using a pond liner that was 20 by 15. So I could have enough extra material to fill down into those holes. Now, the first image on the left is what I had encountered. She'd already had a fountain there that she was not happy with. It wasn't running and so forth. And I went, okay, well, let me look at it. And I unearthed it, took off all of the stone and 15 tons of pea gravel that was on top of it and got down to where her basin was. Now she had all of this and she had a little teeny tiny, basically almost like a 15-gallon nursery bucket. So it's not very big. Basically, it's like 10 gallons of water to hold all, to run all of this fountain. Not enough. And she had a little tiny 90-gallon per hour pump. That's not going to push that water up to the top of the speaker and give her what she wanted. So after undigging it and came up with this other design. Now, if you'll notice picture in the middle, the squares in the square dugout was actually where my catch reservoir was. So this entire area has got a grade that goes right down to this catch reservoir. Now, these catch reservoir boxes, they're basically, they look like giant milk crates that are slightly smaller. They're only about a foot deep. And you put that there, your water collects there, it runs into your catch basin where your pump is at. And that's what the circle is. And that circle was, it doesn't look very big here, but that hole, the round hole was about almost 3 feet wide, about 3 feet wide. So it held quite a bit of water, and it was 2.5 feet deep. So it held quite a bit of water, plus everything running down into it. It did just what I needed it to. We had gone with a riverbed design, kind of a creek bed, have the little shells cascading down with some lights and so forth as you wanted her fish. And so we were going to do spitter fish into it. Had a design already set. We were good to go until in the middle of these big blue boxes in the back. Those are concrete tiled boxes. It took 4 grown men to move each one of these. Heavy, incredibly heavy. They had to have them back inside this fountain feature. Okay, so we tore it all the way down, straight back down to the ground and started all over again to incorporate these. Yeah, it was fun. It was fun. And in the end, this is what they came up with and what they liked. Now, not exactly my druthers, but they loved it. They were happy with it. And this is what they wanted. Okay. So we just basically turned those concrete tiled boxes into bubblers, put a water fountain on it, put some lighting in there. And there you go. Underneath all of the fish is all your bulkheads. We actually took those big flagstones, we actually put holes so the bulkheads sat down inside and cut those out. That was fun. That was a lot of fun. No, it really was fun because it was a learning experience. I learned a whole lot on this one. I also learned what not to do. And if I was to do this thing over again, there's several things that I would do differently. Number one, see where the tall fish is. Basically, that's where my reservoir for my pump was. Now, to get to it, there was just a little rock that we had to move. Not a big deal. But if the next time I do this, I would actually do an external pump area, because to get to this, it's not real easy. Thank God you don't have to get to the pump very often. And we ran the tubing up underneath the rocks, and where that blue pot is, there is a flagstone box that I made, and that houses all of my valves, all my excess tubing, all of the stuff that's up into water, waterfall. So it ended up working out just fine in hiding it. But I would definitely, if you're going to do something this big, I would do it so that you have access to your pump and everything is outside of the water feature. And that's just a matter of just taking a hole next to whatever your water feature is. And it's going to be the same kind of concept, but it's just going to be off to the side. Your water's still going to fill into that, but it's going to be much easier to get to. Now, there are other ways to do this, of course, but this is what I learned, and this is what I found would have been easier for me. But like I said, they're happy with it, and that's what they wanted. So voila, they got it. They got it. And this took me a month to do, basically by myself, but it was in the dead heat of summer, so I didn't work very often. Now, maintenance on these. So people want to know, how hard is it? They don't want one because the leaves are going to get into it. What about, sticks and twigs? And how often do I have to clean inside? And, I have worked where there was a fountain, big infinity fountain, ran 24/7, 365, cleaned it out once a year. And it was just sediment. Once you've got that grate in there, so your bottom of your basin it has a basin, and your bottom of your fountain has a basin, and then it has a heavy duty grate and a mesh over top of that grate. That mesh keeps everything out, keeps your rocks from sinking into your basin. And I thought I had to put a picture up in here, and I didn't, but it is essential that you have that mesh over that grate, because otherwise all your leaves, all your twigs, everything else is going to kind of filter through, and it will get in there. Now, granted, your pump is going to have a pre-filter on it, which is great, but it doesn't keep out everything. And whatever does make it through your pre-filter on your, on your inlet for your pump, usually will fly straight through there. It's not going to hurt it. Anything that doesn't, that does get stuck in that pre-filter is not going to go through, obviously. If it did, it would kill your pump. That seems to be what happens a lot of times. Pumps will either suck things in. Hair, dog hair seems to be a really big component to pumps not working, especially when you got your magnetic drive ones that are rotary and they've just got the magnet in there. That tangles everything up in there. Also, letting it run dry. Letting it run dry is probably the worst thing you could do for a pump. And using bleach. I know people like to use bleach to kill off algae inside their pumps and whatnot. Don't do that. Bleach just eats through all your rubber gaskets and everything, makes them hard, makes them brittle. So don't do that. Don't use bleach. There's other things you can do. There's algae fix. There are things you can put inside your water, additives that are not harmful to any pets or anything that drinks it. They're safe for you. They're safe for me. We're not going to get hurt by them, but it'll help take care of that algae and so forth without ruining your pumps and your linings or anything else that's got any kind of rubber or silicone on it. Bleach is awful. And bleach doesn't get rid of your algae. It just bleaches it out. The algae is still there. You just can't see it. So yeah, use an algae fix, an algicide, or one of those, and you're going to do much better. There's also things that you can help do to help reduce that scale and that hard water deposits that you get at on things that have evaporated. You get that kind of buildup, that hard, crusty stuff you can never get off. Well, there are things additives that you can put inside your fountain as well. That makes it much, much, much easier to get that stuff off. It still might be there, but once you start to rub it off and try to get it off with, your hand, even your hand, it comes off very easily. So definitely use those. It's going to make your life a lot easier. Now, as for anything that falls on the top of your fountains and so forth into that reservoir type of area, they usually just blow off. If you got a blower, you've got a yard guy, they'll just blow it off and it lifts right up out of there. Or if you need to, you can pick it out or take a broom to it, whatever's easier for you. So yeah, they're really fairly easy to clean. I have no complaints about that. So what kind of questions did y'all have for me? Crickets. I don't like this.
Where do you get the
I get it from different places. Bill Landscape Nursery, they've got the basins and they usually come in 2 by 2, 3 by 3, and 4 by 4. Now the basins are going to be, of course, 4 by 4, and they're all about a foot deep. So the thing when doing a disappearing fountain is, so you've got this basin, you're going to have to put that down into the ground. So know that that's the area that you're going to have to dig out. You want to make sure that is level with your ground all the way around. So basically when you dig this, you're going to dig down about 13, maybe 14 inches. Set this down in there, put a layer of sand, kind of settle it down in there, and then pack it in around it so that's nice and solid and firm. And then that'll give you a good base to start your infinity fountain on. Now, in that basin, you're going to put cinder blocks. You'll need cinder blocks underneath that to help support the weight of your fountain. Because once you've got that pot up there and you fill it with water, that thing's going to weigh, it's going to weigh a ton. Probably, you're going to add another anywhere between like 150 and 300 pounds to the top of that grate, depending on what size you go with. So that it needs just that extra support. Yeah, they can hold a lot, and they're said to hold, X number of pounds, like 12 or 1,500 pounds. I still would rather have some cinder blocks underneath that big grate just to be on the safe side. Now, these grates, when you get them, usually don't have any holes or any kind of access to get to your pump. So that'll be something you'll need to cut out. Sometimes they do. It just all depends.
what about the grate? Where do you get
The grates? Same place. Usually when you get a basin kit, like if you go to Nelson Water Gardens, you go to Bill's, or even Home Depot, Lowe's, they have these kits. And it's going to include your basin, your grate, and your mesh. Super easy. Sometimes they have them cut out, sometimes they don't. If it's easy to cut it out by hacksaw, or even a pair of long-handled bypass pruners will cut through it as well. So it's not, completely rigid. It's easily cut through. And you're going to want to do a place in the corner for your pump, and you're going to want to do a place right in the middle of your grate for your bulkhead or your fittings and plumbing to come up through.